Hi, it's Dr. Ingo Mann here, and I'm happy to be doing this presentation in your mouth, the gateway to optimal health for the Weston Price chapter here in Madison, Wisconsin. And before I want to get started, for those of you who don't know me, just a little bit of a background. Graduated from Marquette University School of Dentistry in 1985, and I founded Integrative Dental Solutions not right after I started my own practice, but really after I changed my whole philosophy of practice, which was when I did a doctorate in integrative medicine, as well as became an accredited member of the International Academy of Oral Medicine and Toxicology, which is an organization which sets a lot of the protocols and standards for biological dentists. And I'm also a founding member of the Academy of Ozone Therapy, and that's really been a big part of my practice over the last couple of years. And most importantly, I've got a couple really cute kids and a beautiful family, and here's my little guy, my 7-year-old Jack, who had just lost his front tooth there, and my daughter Sophia. So just a little bit about me. And as far as questions go, I know that in your program it may say that we're doing questions at the end, but I'd really like you to ask questions as we're going along. For those of you, I'm actually taping this presentation prior to doing it. And for those of you who are part of my inner circle, feel free, if you're watching this, to go ahead and just post any questions or comments that you have right on the Facebook page. All right, so a lot of times when I'm doing this type of presentation, I get a question: why is a dentist doing webinars about general health? And of course, for those of you who are part of the Weston Price Foundation, you of course know the answer to this. And Weston Price is actually very much of the driving force behind biological dentistry. And if you don't know his history, it's actually quite interesting. He was actually one of the leading researchers for the for the American Dental Association. And he was a very decorated researcher, and that was until he started saying things that they didn't agree with. And so a lot of his early research was about studying civilizations, primitive civilizations, for example, in the South Pacific and different places where Western civilization had not come in contact with, and just studied what happened when people went from eating their indigenous natural diet to eating processed foods and sugars. And he showed what happened to jaw development and what happened to their health. He also did a lot of research on root canal teeth, and he did some studies, for example, where he implanted teeth from people, for example, that had died of heart disease, and he implanted some of those teeth into laboratory animals and was able to show that he was able to basically elicit some of those same diseases in those animals. And it was that work that led Dr. George Meining to write the book Root Canal Cover-Up. So he did a lot of meticulous research. He did a lot of work. A lot of his work has been attempted to be discredited, but the fact is he did some very good research, and there's a lot of good information. So the dentists have really been behind a lot of the whole oral systemic connection. People like him were the pioneers in that. So my goal for this presentation, especially, I know I'm preaching to the choir because those of you who are part of this foundation obviously are very familiar with it. So I want to make sure that I give you some really cool new information, some things you may not have known, and give you some further insight into some of the things that you may already know. And just the whole role of what holistic dentistry does in helping you achieve better health, and then some really interesting information about amalgams and root canals. Again, things that hopefully that you weren't aware of. And I also want to show you, because one of the things that our practice has been all about is really being very high tech. And I really consider holistic dentistry to be the dentistry of the future. And sometimes people think it's like the past is what holistic dentistry is, but you're really seeing more and more dental ads and more journals talking about biocompatibility and the effects of what we're doing in the mouth, what it's doing to the body. And then finally, I want to introduce you to some neat new things that we're doing with oxygen and ozone, and how we're able to use that to help patients get better and achieve better health. So let's talk toxins, because that's really where it starts. Because when you're trying to get healthy, you really are looking at removing that burden on your body. And of course, we know about some of the obvious things. We try to avoid different chemicals. Nobody wants to live under high power tension wires, and we all worry about getting clean water. And really, as a dentist, I deal a lot in toxins. When you consider, what's in amalgams and crowns, when you combine the two, the electrical currents you get, even the composite filling materials, the filler particles that are in there, and then of course the bacteria and toxins from gum disease and root canals. You may know about some of the issues with fluoride, and of course the radiation that's associated with X-rays. So that's really made holistic dentists and myself become very conscious about dealing with those things. And I've also noticed that a lot more of the healthcare practitioners I deal with are also becoming much more educated about that. A big portion of our new patient flow actually comes from other healthcare practitioners that are now starting to look into the mouths of their patients. And this right here was really the statement that first got me interested in holistic dentistry, because when I saw this, I thought, boy, even if he's wrong and off by a lot, for that much of illness to be related to the mouth really made me think twice about what I was doing, and made me want to look more into that. The other person that I found to be quite interesting is Dr. Thomas Rau, and he's the director of the medical clinic of the Paracelsus Medical Clinic in Switzerland. And he said, if one were to pass a law limiting holistic physicians to a single holistic method, I would stick with my dentist. And so I'm on their website the other day, and I'm looking at this little introductory video, and I'm seeing they're using actually a tooth organ chart. They're doing some testing like we do in the office. That was the implant system that we use. And they really believe that you cannot get healthy without a healthy mouth. And the first doctor you see in this clinic actually is the dentist. So, most people, when they look, if they were to look in somebody's mouth and see a couple fillings like that, they would go, yeah, maybe I see, some old broken down amalgams. If you're a dental professional, you may say, yeah, I see maybe even some fractures or some little decay starting here. But really, as a holistic dentist, what I see is I see this smoking tooth, and you can actually go on this website. It's on the IOMT.org website, or if you Google smoking tooth, and they're using a special fluorescent screen to show what happens to a 25-year-old dental amalgam when you rub it. And this is the one that really gets me. This is when you dip it in some coffee and look at the mercury vapor coming off a 25-year-old dental amalgam. So this is a serious issue, and because here's the thing, mercury is a heavy metal, and it's a very toxic one. And I love this cartoon. The guy's walking on the dental office, and he says, "You've got 7 new fillings on your left side," and his head's tilting that way. So it's not heavy that way, but it's definitely heavy as far as toxicity goes. So the thing about the toxicity that's really important, and this is going to be one of the most important points I make here about the amalgams, is that the American Dental Association for years denied that any mercury was coming off these things. And of course, that was pretty easy to disprove with like the video that you saw there and other measuring devices. And so now the company line is, well, it's an insignificant dose of mercury that's coming off. Well, there was a really interesting study that they did where they showed that when they gave a dose of mercury that only killed 1 out of 100 rats, and they gave a dose of lead that only killed 1 out of 100 rats, when they combined the two, they actually killed 100% of the rats. So, the key is that with all toxicity, it's never just one thing. And so it really depends on, over your lifespan, what other toxins have you been exposed to? What's your diet been? There's a lot of factors other than just, okay, I've got a couple fillings, and asking whether or not those in particular are making you sick. You really need to look at the entire picture, because really, the other thing mercury does is it just decreases your ability to deal with other stresses to your body. It's that, they talk about that proverbial straw. And when you think about all of the different things we're exposed to these days, this is one more toxin that's and a very potent one that we need to eliminate from our lives. And so people ask, like, well, if it's so bad, why does the American Dental Association still support mercury fillings? And that is a good question. And if you look at the history of the American Dental Association, you have to remember that back in the late 1800s, the prevailing dental organization at that time was the Royal College of Dental Surgeons. And they actually said that if you use amalgam, that you would be thrown out of the dental society for committing malpractice. Well, because it was easy to use and it was inexpensive, it gained in popularity. So the dentists that were using the mercury ended up forming their own dental society, which led to the formation of the American Dental Association. So the whole mercury debate was at the very foundation of the formation of the American Dental Association. So for them to ever say that mercury is bad would go to the very core of their existence. So that's just something that they're not going to want to do. So, what makes holistic dentists different? Well, first of all, we make sure that we're very careful about taking out these amalgams, because that's really the critical part of this whole process. Because if you're not taking these out safely, you're exposing yourself to a lot of mercury vapor, and that's really the critical part. And that's why we use things like a rubber dam. We section the fillings so we're not cutting as much on the fillings themselves. We're using additional vacuum and different filtration. We're also actually using supplemental oxygen or filtered air for people so they're not inhaling those mercury vapors. We use bentonite clay or activated charcoal. We have people rinse with that before and after the amalgam removal. There's some different protocols that we use that are known as the Huggins protocols, where we remove the amalgams in a proper either sequence or by not crossing the midline or even by not violating the 7-day immune cycle. And then we do some other things. Usually we leave that up to the patient's other healthcare practitioners as to what they want to do with other nutritional and immune support. It's not going to be as critical because of the protocols that we use. And a lot of the older books that you'll read, they may say things like, you need to do this one tooth at a time and all these different things. That's not going to be as critical if you're following these types of protocols. So here's what a mercury-safe dental operatory looks like. And I highlighted the safe because you'll see more and more dentists advertising themselves to be mercury-free, and they're doing that just because they don't place dental amalgams. But the critical part is that you're operating in a mercury-safe manner, and that's what we're talking about when we're doing these protocols. So a dentist may call himself mercury-free, but he's not necessarily going through these proper protocols. So here's some of the items that we're using. This is the vacuum that gets put right below the patient's mouth as we're removing the amalgam. We're constantly filtering the air, actually 24/7 in our operatories. There's a charcoal filter in there. There's a UV light in there. And then we have a negative ion generator, which is actually like a pitcher and catcher system. So we're also running that on a continuous basis. The second part of being a holistic dentist is using biocompatible materials, because you want to make sure that once you take the old stuff out, that the new stuff you're putting in is actually better. And you would think that if it's a white filling material, it would just inherently be better, but that's not necessarily the case. So when we pick materials, we obviously want to pick a material that's not toxic to begin with. So in other words, something like mercury is going to be toxic for everybody. And then we also want to make sure that we're also using materials that don't have components to them that people may be reactive to. So there's a couple ways to test for that. And one is to do a blood serum test, which is known as a Clifford or peak energies test. And the other way is to use something called EAV, or an energetic type of testing. And you may be familiar with something like applied kinesiology or muscle testing. And those all work on the same principle of seeing how your body reacts to a specific material. And I have found over the years to be an extremely accurate and effective way. I also like it because you don't have to take a blood sample that has to be sent out. The cost is substantially less, and you're also able to get those results immediately. And we actually have a naturopathic doctor here in the office that comes in a couple times a week that can do that, because we want to make sure that the material we're putting in is actually going to be better than what we're taking out. And the key is to know that there's no perfect material. If there was, then we wouldn't have to go through all of these testing procedures. But until they're able to regrow a tooth, where there's always going to be a compromise. So we're looking to find what's going to have the least impact on your body. And so the materials that we use are really things that, number one, fall into two categories. Something that's called either direct composite filling, which you may know as what's called a white filling. And the advantage is that they are relatively inexpensive. They're still more expensive than a dental amalgam, and they are tooth colored. But the downside is that they do seem to have a much shorter lifespan in molars, which are your back chewing teeth, or if you're trying to cover large surfaces. So in those cases, we use what are called indirect composites and ceramics, which are more like the crowns that you may be familiar with, where you actually take an impression of a tooth, and then you have a laboratory fabricate a much stronger restoration that's then bonded into the tooth. So the nice thing about these is that they do have a much longer lifespan and better biocompatibility in most cases, but they are going to be much more expensive, and they generally take 2 visits. And I say generally, and there's a big but here, because we actually have some really cool technology that we've been using in our office here for quite a long time, which is a CAD/CAM technology, and that allows us to use this device to scan a tooth. And then what we do is we design a restoration. We put a block of this ceramic in, and then it actually gets milled in this milling machine. And there's a little video here, and this happened to be actually a bridge I was milling, but you can see here's the block of ceramic, and it's removing the excess material. And that's how it actually fabricates that crown in literally a matter of minutes. So we can now fabricate those restorations in 1 visit. So, excuse me, let me just give you just a couple examples of what that looks like. So here's a case that I like to show patients because it gives a very good sequence of just the thinking process that we go through when we restore a tooth. Because this tooth right here, if you go into probably 9 out of 10 dental offices you'll walk into will say, well, yeah, we're going to need to put a crown on that tooth. And that involves grinding the whole top and the whole sides of the tooth away. And in most cases, they're going to leave, if they don't see decay here, they're going to even leave any amalgam that's underneath there. The process I go through, and all of the doctors here in our office, is that first we remove the old dental amalgam. Now this is actually the clamp for the rubber dam, and remove any decay that we find, and then we evaluate to see how intact the tooth is. At that point, if it looks good, we save all that tooth. If we see some big fractures here, then I may cover a part of that tooth to protect it. But we always leave as much of your own healthy tooth as possible. And then we powder that, scan it, and then the machine makes that onlay in, like I said, in a matter of minutes. And in this particular case, I did a couple fillings while we're waiting for that. When the fillings were done, the onlay was done, and we bonded in. And this literally took 1 visit we were able to do that in 1 hour. And how great is that, not to have to come back, get another shot, have a temporary on there that's irritating the tooth for a couple weeks. You come in like this, and an hour later, you've got a brand new, long-lasting restoration in your mouth. This situation we run across very similar to this all the time. This was a case that I did for a national journal, and took some nice pictures of that. Again, that same sequence of preparing the teeth. This is how it looks, how the restoration looks out of the mouth, and here's how it looks bonded in. Again, here are some, even though they're not extremely large restorations, they were deep, they were on molars that take some heavy chewing. I know that if I just throw a white filling in there, it's going to look great for 2 or 3 years, but then they're going to break down and need to be replaced. So by doing these inlays, they look great, and I know that when I look at these teeth 5, 10, 15 years down the road, they look like the day they were put in. So this would be a good place for, if you have any questions, you can send those to me via Facebook if you're on the inner circle here. Otherwise, let's talk about the next subject that is near and dear to the hearts of Weston Price members, because a lot of controversy about root canals, because the whole thing about amalgams is it's a pretty easy decision to look at a tooth that's got an old amalgam in it and say, yeah, that thing's got to come out. Let's do it safely. Let's put in something biocompatible. And I know I'm going to have a good, strong, healthy tooth for a long time. When you're talking about root canals, you're talking about some much more drastic measures that need to be taken if you decide not to do the root canal. So that's really the question, is can you ever really eliminate that infection around a root canal tooth? And so first of all, let me just real quick go over what exactly a root canal is, because sometimes people still have some questions. So when you have a tooth like this, and this is the gum line, this is the part that's sticking out, and you get a cavity and you get bacteria getting into that center of the tooth where you've got a nerve and you've got a blood supply, that's when you get an infection. That's when you get a tooth that's hurting or swelling. And so what the dentist does that's doing the root canal is he makes an access opening into that nerve, and he uses some files to clean out and debride that center of the tooth, and then uses a filling material, and there's a number of different ones, to basically obliterate the whole center of that canal so that you have no more space for the bacteria to grow in here. So that's really all we're doing with the root canals. We're taking the inside of the infected tooth, cleaning it out, and then hopefully eliminating as much of the infection as possible. So when dentists show you what the anatomy of a tooth looks like, they draw you this nice clean picture. Here's your enamel, here's the root, and you've got your blood and your nerve and your lymph. And it's very accurate, but it leaves out something very important, and that's the fact that you have several miles of these dentinal tubules that lead from the nerve out to the bone structure around the tooth. And when you're doing the root canal, you're filling this main canal, but there's no way to fill these small tubules. And the problem is that these tubules can harbor some very toxic bacteria. Now, the problem is they're not the type of bacteria that produce pus. So when you look at one of these teeth on an x-ray, that tooth may look perfectly fine. So you could have a tooth that looks like it has a big infection, but it may not be toxic. And then on the other hand, you could be looking at a tooth that looks like it had a root canal done and everything looks perfect, that could be highly toxic and be having a very detrimental effect on your health. So the question is, how do we figure out what's going on with those teeth? And first we need to figure out what are all the different problems and what's going on with the tooth. So you can have things like not being compatible with the material. One of the materials we use is called gutta percha, and one of the things about it is that over a period of time, that material will actually kind of shrink and form some gaps, and now instead of properly sealing the tooth, now you can get bacteria seeping back in there. Sometimes the canals just aren't properly filled, either not, that the fact that the dentist didn't get all the way down to the end of the tooth. Sometimes it's just the shape of the canals themselves, or little canals that come off the sides that are almost impossible to fill. Sometimes you get recurring infections because there's maybe little fracture lines in the root. Again, the toxicity, the gutta percha, besides being a latex-based material that you may have an incompatibility with, there's also a cadmium component to that material. Now, generally, because it's encased in a sealer, and if they're making these sealers more biocompatible, it's not a huge issue, but I think everybody's different, and we need to make sure that material is not a problem for patients. And then also the energetic disturbances, and we have some tooth organ charts where we can show you how different teeth are actually associated with different organ systems, and there is some disruption to the energetic flow through the head and neck area, and those are basically similar to what the acupuncture meridians would be. So when there's disturbances on those meridians, you can get disturbances with the associated organ systems. So the whole problem with root canals is that the gentleman, the doctor who has done all of the toxicity testing on these, he recently made this statement. He said, all teeth with root canals are infected, but not all are toxic. And I think that's an important statement because, the infection can be relatively easy to deal with. The toxicity is a much bigger issue, but we need to find out what's going on with these teeth. And fortunately, we have, again, a couple tools to do that. One is to do some DNA testing, to check for, the presence of the organisms that are causing these problems. And then again, the electrodermal screening or the EAV testing that will determine what type of toxicity is there, what kind of impact is it having on your health, and also what can be done to alleviate that. Because, we don't want to necessarily pull a tooth and get rid of a tooth that may not be an issue with your health, because the problem is the only other option is to extract the tooth. And I've had a lot of people that have said, I will never have a root canal, that when you present all of the information to them, have actually changed their mind, because what they've realized is that, hey, wait a minute, this root canal tooth, even though it's not an ideal situation, is sometimes the least of the evils. Because when you lose a tooth like that, what do you do to replace it? You either have to grind the teeth down, the adjacent teeth down, to do a bridge. We have to drill a hole in your jawbone and put an implant in there, which in most cases, most dentists place a titanium implant. We might have to do some kind of a removable partial that you have to take in and out, which may or may not be something that you'd like to do. Or even just leaving the space. And there's all kinds of problems associated with leaving a space. Obviously, if you're pulling that tooth in the picture there, what the problem is there. You're going to look like you've got Billy Bob teeth, and you're not going to want to be seen in public. But it's just as important to replace back teeth because of the function, because of shifting teeth. There's all kinds of problems that happen if you don't replace missing teeth. Now, fortunately, we've got some much better options that we have coming up, because there's really no perfect solution. And I really think the most important thing is that we just need to make sure that you make an informed decision. And so some of the solutions that we have now are that, for example, when it comes to bridges, we're now able to do all ceramic bridges like this, and not just in front teeth, but actually also for back teeth. As far as removable partials go, there's a new material called Valplast. There's actually some different brand names like Flexite partial, but these are nylon-based partials that are, number one, testing to be highly biocompatible. They're very aesthetic. When you put this in the mouth, these little clasps just disappear. They're metal-free, so it's really a really nice material, and we can even use that in cases where there's just one or two teeth missing. We can create a little appliance like that. You pop it in, and then it kind of, obviously eliminates the need to grind down a couple teeth or to place implants in a situation like this. But there's also some really neat things that are available in our office, and we're one of the few dental practices in the country that's placing this non-metallic implant system from Switzerland. Now, I never thought that I would actually physically place implants myself, just because of, it's a very technically demanding procedure. I mean, you're drilling a hole in people's jawbones, and you have to worry about things like sinuses and nerves and all kinds of things. So all that really changed when we invested in this new imaging technology called the Galileos, and that with an extremely low dose will give us a 3D picture of your mouth. And this image may look familiar to some of you. This is very similar to a panoramic X-ray, and it'll actually render the information as a panoramic X-ray, but it's actually 3D. So we're actually able to look at wherever I put this little window. I'm actually able to look at the jaw in 3 dimensions. And what that's allowed me to do is now very accurately plan surgically on where to place implants. And I'll show you this. This was actually a seminar I did a couple of years ago for the International Academy of Oral Medicine and Toxicology on the subject. And it's a little bit longer than I would maybe normally show, but I had this video and I just wanted to show you because it's really fascinating how this process works. And this is virtually done in real time. So what I did here is this particular scan that you're seeing, these teeth, I scanned using that CEREC CAD/CAM system that we use to fabricate our inlays and onlays. And then what I do is I take, and this is an actual case, you'll get to see this all the way through. And what I've done is I've scanned the space where the tooth was extracted. I did this particular scan off a model. And then what I actually did was I'm designing right here the tooth that's going to go into that space. Because one of the things that I absolutely hated about sending my implant cases out was that the surgeon would put the implant wherever they just kind of like putting it. And they didn't do it often with the consideration of where I, as a dentist, would have to put the final crown. So now I get to design where exactly how I want that final crown to look. And then what I do is once I have this designed, I'm able to export that case and save it as a special file that integrates with that Galileos. So in the next video here, you're going to see this again is the same patient, and here's that missing tooth. Here's the space that we want to put an implant in. And so I go over here and I'm now importing that CAD/CAM data where I designed the tooth, and you'll see it's reading the CAD/CAM file, and it brings that file actually into my 3D X-ray. So here you see the tooth, and then once I decide that that's the right one, here's the really amazing part. Every time I do this, I'm still amazed at how advanced this technology is. So I'm actually just registering. I'm saying, okay, this point corresponds to this point, and it allows the software to register the 3D scan that I took in the mouth or off the model with the 3D X-ray scan. So again, here you see it's registering the data, and then it takes us to the next screen. And now here it shows the scan overlaid into the X-ray, and I can see exactly where my gum tissue is, and you can see it's lined up exactly with the tooth. So now this is where it gets really. Hope you're not getting bored here, because this is where it gets really cool. Now you can actually, and I'll zoom in on this. I can actually see exactly where the gum tissue is, where the tooth is, and now I go into my implant library. I pick the tooth that we're working on. This particular implant system that comes in different diameters and different lengths, and I pick the implant I want, and you can see I'm going to line it up. I'm going to place it exactly where I want that implant to go. and I can check all around to make sure I'm not running into the adjacent roots. So this is like I tell people, you feel like you're Superman doing these implants, because you know exactly what you're dealing with, and it takes all the guesswork out of it. And then I can plan a surgical report on that, and I can also order the surgical guide from Germany. So I send this information to Germany, and they fabricate this for me. And what it does is it allows me to, when I make when I'm making basically the preparation for the implant, it gives me the perfect alignment, the perfect depth. It's everything. It's accurate to within 100 microns. So this gives me the confidence that I can place that implant. Well, I used to say I could do it more accurately than most specialists. The thing is, now this type of technology has gotten so prevalent that this is really the standard of care. But that's why we're able to place an implant like this. And this is actually the patient. This took less than 15 minutes, and you can see there's not even any bleeding. We just use what's called a tissue punch. We make the opening, we put the implant in, and this is what it looked like immediately after the surgery. And we took a scan, and it looks exactly as you can see as it did on the scan when we planned it. And here is a few months later, after the implant's integrated. Here you can see the final restoration. So he went from having this space to having this tooth. And it's just an amazing thing to be able to do for people, and it's great to know that we're able to place this non-metallic implant and get that beautiful of an aesthetic result. All right, so what if you should opt to have a root canal? Like I said, it just happens where you get a situation where an implant is just not possible because there's not enough bone. The sinuses are right there. Maybe the nerve runs too close to the surface where we just aren't able to do an implant. The patient just says, I absolutely don't want to have a partial or the teeth ground down, the adjacent teeth, and maybe the testing shows that there isn't an issue. So what we do is we're using something called ozonated oxygen to minimize the impact that this therapy can have on your health. And the reason it's so powerful is because almost all of the organisms associated with these root canals all live in the absence of oxygen. So oxygen actually kills them. And the ozone is extremely powerful and does a couple different things. So the ozone, there's a lot of misunderstandings about what ozone is and does, but you hear about it being in the upper atmosphere, and that's actually where it is created, because the UV light actually splits O2, which is oxygen, into single oxygen molecules, and then it combines to form O3, which is ozone, and then that actually falls through the atmosphere, and then it actually combines with pollutants and cleanses the planet. And what happens is, because ozone is very easy to measure, when you hear them talking about an ozone action alert day, it doesn't mean that ozone is the pollutant. It means that ozone, because it's the easiest thing to measure, is just an indicator of pollution being present, but it's actually there to do the cleanup. And that's the same thing that we try to do in the mouth. And in nature, you get the UV light and lightning forming ozone. And in our office, we actually use a little ozone generator like this that creates a little plasma arc that, as you pass the oxygen through it, let me go back. I'm sorry, I kind of skipped over that slide. Oh, sorry about that. Go through this. What we're doing here is we're actually using medical grade oxygen, and then we're running it through this oxygen generator. And by controlling the flow of the oxygen and how strong the little plasma arc is, we can very accurately create the proper dosage of ozone. And then we just have this little port, and we attach a syringe to there, and we can fill syringes and actually inject that into and around root canal teeth. And we actually use it for all kinds of other applications, from helping fight decay to helping fight gum disease. So it's a oxygen is a very, very powerful tool. And the ozone makes it that much more powerful, because the ozone will do a couple things. Besides having that initial killing effect, it also does a whole number of things to activate your own immune system. And they actually call it a healing cascade. And that's what makes the ozone so powerful, because unlike antibiotics, which only kill a few of the organisms and weaken your immune system afterwards, the oxygen and ozone kill every organism they come in contact with, and then actually sensitize your immune system to those organisms. So it actually continues to work 24/7 after it's been administered. So it does all kinds of different things as far as your body flooding that area with antioxidants, and of course it's very powerful at killing all of these anaerobic organisms that all cannot survive in the presence of oxygen. So really, I kind of call oxygen the ultimate essential nutrients, and and even people who are very much into nutrition really don't always think of oxygen as the nutrient that it is. And really, though, it's at the heart of every process in the body, whether it's immune function or detoxification, and really most importantly is energy production, because without this energy production, nothing else, none of these things are going to happen. And so how that works is that in your mitochondria, those are really the little energy producers in the cell, and your heart is made up as much as 30 to 35% by weight of these mitochondria. All of the foods and everything that you eat, once it's digested and metabolized, it has to combine with oxygen in the mitochondria to produce the energy. Without the oxygen, nothing happens, and it all happens in this Krebs cycle, or the citric acid cycle. And this kind of ties in with the root canals, because this is what I was talking about earlier with the root canals, with the different toxins. They inhibit some of these enzymes here that make this energy cycle go. And if you knock out even one of these, you're not going to be able to take the food that's being metabolized and turn it into the energy that you need. And the one thing that when you sit down and talk to the patients in our practice here, the number one complaint that they have is, I just don't feel good. I just don't have enough energy. So that's why I really wanted to talk about this today, because it really ties in with, eating a good diet. But if you're missing this critical, important step, you're not going to get the energy and the benefit of eating that good diet. And so, this is part of actually a more extensive webinar that I did on oxygen and ozone therapies. And I talk about that, again, oxygen is a double-edged sword, and that you do get some waste products when you do this, like water. And of course, when you breathe in oxygen, you're breathing out CO2, or carbon dioxide, and what we call reactive oxygen species, which can do some damage. So we have to be. It's like every other engine. You're going to put fuel in and you're going to get energy out, but you're also going to get waste products that are associated with that. And Dr. Schallenberger, who really brought ozone to this country, made this statement. He says, all chronically ill patients produce insufficient amounts of energy. And, here's the thing. You don't lack energy because you're sick. You're really sick because you're not able to produce the energy that you need. And then in the morning when you wake up, the day looks like this, when you really want the day to look like this. And it all starts with that healthy mouth and good nutrition. And you need that energy. You want to get up and get going. And actually those couple pictures that you saw, I just was on a trip in Canada fishing, and you want to be able to get up in the morning and catch some big fish, or play with your family or be productive at work, but that's really what good health is all about. So I want to thank you very much for your attention. I know you may, have a lot more questions. I do want to let you know, if you're not aware of it, I do have this Optimal Health Inner Circle. It is a closed Facebook group, and I do periodic webinars. I do interviews with doctors, and if you're a member, you have access to all those webinars and past recordings. And you can also, I'm on there all the time. People ask me questions, and I have other healthcare practitioners that are members there as well. And I do follow-up interviews with, I've done some interesting interviews with people on hyperbaric oxygen, on some of the oxygen therapies that they're doing. So there's some good stuff on there. And actually just a really knowledgeable community. I've got some great, people put a question up there, I answer it, and sometimes one of the people on the group will have a better answer than I do. So it's always good to have access to a lot of people that kind of share the same common goal of achieving optimal health. And there is a monthly charge for that. I do a $1 trial, so you can try it out for a month and see if you like it. And it, like I said, it is on Facebook, but it's easy to cancel. There's no long-term commitment. I just think it's something really neat that I came up with, because I as a holistic dentist, and being one of very few people that do what I do, I have a huge number of healthcare practitioners in my practice, and I'm always talking to different people. And one of the things I thought was, man, I wish I could get this information that I'm learning from my patients out to the rest of my patients, and I found that this was the best way to do that. So if you go on this website right here, you're going to be able to see a replay of this webinar, and you'll be able to sign up for this Facebook group if you should decide to do that. All right. Again, if you have any questions, please you can email me at ingo@drmon.com, or you can go ahead and post your question on the Facebook group. So again, thank you very much for your attention. I hope you got some good information out of this webinar, and I hope to talk or see you soon. Thanks.